record. All right, let's start. You see my screen, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So last week we did up to here, like the perfect and imperfect competition, but we're gonna go further into this, so don't worry if you don't understand it just yet. Let's talk a bit about, so we did cost and revenue. Let's talk a bit about profits now. We know the formula for profit is total revenue minus total cost. In economics, we use this kind of pi sign for profit. Literally just looks like pi, except pi kind of looks like this, right? But these are just two straight lines. If you ever see that, just know that means profit and not pi. So profit is equal to total revenue minus total cost, which is the amount of money you get from selling your goods and services minus your total cost. Now, in accounting, the only total cost that we consider are actual physical costs, or known as explicit costs. And these are just your total fixed cost and your total variable cost. But in economics, remember that we also have to consider the implicit costs, which are the opportunity cost of things. Remember what opportunity cost is?
Yeah.
So it was the cost of the next best alternative for gun, yeah?
Mm.
So just remember that for economics, we consider two types of costs. We can show this an example here, where we have three different companies, company A, B, and C. All of them are currently producing laptops, okay? They're not producing tablets right now. But here we have the profits that they get from selling laptops and the profits that they could get from selling tablets, okay? If you look at company A, the profit that they're getting for laptops is 100K. The profit that they could get for tablets is 100K. So their economic profit is actually £0, which is also called normal profit, because the average revenue is equal to the average cost. This is just a condition because there's no opportunity cost here. If they switch to tablets, their economic profit would not increase by any amount. Yeah. If you look at company B here, the profit for selling laptops is 110K, and the profit that they could get for selling tablets is 100K. So they are actually in something called supernormal profit here, or abnormal profit. This is positive economic profit because they're making 10K more than they could if they sold tablets. Do you get it? And the condition for this is AR is bigger than AC, average revenue is bigger than AC. But these conditions are just linked to the graphs, and we'll see that a bit later. But don't worry about that. If you look at company C, the profits that they get for selling laptops is 90K, and the profits that they could be selling tablets for is 100K. So they're in a minus 10K loss here. This is called subnormal profits. Okay, so their average revenue is less than their average cost. But yeah, you probably won't get asked a question on this. It's just for your understanding. So normal profit is the minimum level of profit required to keep factors of production in their current use. So this is either when total revenue is equal to total cost or average revenue is equal to average cost, same thing. Supernormal profit, any profit made above normal profit. So AI is bigger than AC. Subnormal profit, any economic profit below normal profit. So an economic loss where the profit being made is not enough to cover the opportunity cost of production. But just know these definitions. We're going to represent these different kind of profits today. Let's look at profit maximization now. So profit is maximized when marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue. Okay. How do I explain this? So we have the profit formula, right? Which was what? Total revenue minus total cost, isn't it? Yeah. If we want to maximize profit, one way we can do this is by taking the derivative of it. Yeah. So just know that in economics, if you ever do this in uni, all of these functions here are in terms of quantity. So that's why I did d pi over dq. And also, so to maximize, you have to do this equal to 0, right? You have to differentiate TR minus TC. And in economics, whenever you differentiate some total revenue or total cost or total anything, you get the marginal revenue and the marginal cost. So what you'll have is that you get the marginal revenue minus the marginal cost is equal to 0. Then you just rearrange to get that marginal revenue, marginal cost, and that's your profit maximization formula. Okay? But you don't need to know that. It's just for your understanding of where it actually comes from. And with this condition, you're always going to look for it at a point in a graph to see where the firm would produce if they wanted to profit maximize. You can also explain it in terms of words. So the reason MC is equal to MR is because if your marginal revenue is greater than your marginal cost, that means that basically means you have more revenue than your cost, right? MR is bigger than MC. Yeah, if your MR is bigger than your MC, so basically your revenues are higher than your costs, then you should produce more, isn't it? It makes sense to produce some more, not less, or not the same, because you're getting more revenue than it's actually costing you. If you're so for example, that would be at a point like here, okay? Say if I want to produce here, that's my quantity, right? My marginal revenue is at this point here. I mean, my marginal cost is at this point here. If I go further up, my marginal revenue is here. My MR is bigger than my MC, so I should produce some more going along this line. Say if my marginal revenue was lower than my MC. So say if I'm producing here, my quantity is here. This is my marginal revenue. This is my marginal cost up here. Now MC is bigger than MR. Yeah. So what should I do? Should I produce more or less? I should produce less, isn't it? Because it's costing me more to produce another good because my costs are higher than my revenue. So I should move downwards to this curve. And so this is why I meet here where my marginal cost is equal to my marginal revenue. And that's the profit maximizing point. Okay. So yeah. If you remember from last week, we looked at perfect competition, right? And we saw that perfect competition only has one cost graph, this one here, okay? And one price level, because everyone in perfect competition are the same, they charge the same prices. That's why their revenue curve is just one horizontal line, okay? And then we have our normal marginal cost. The only thing missing on this diagram right now is an average cost curve, which would look like this, because it goes through the minimum, it has to go through the bottom point, and MC has to cut through the bottom point. And that would be a complete diagram for a firm in perfect competition, but we'll look at that later anyway. So yeah, the firm here would produce where MC is equal to MR, which is this point here. And this is the profit maximization point. Okay, you get why it's MC is equal to MR, right? Because the two lines cross with each other, MR and MC. So that's why they're crossing. This is the quantity of profit maximization. What else? So yeah, then one other thing you can take from this is that this firm in perfect competition, they're making normal profits where AC is equal to AR. Okay. See where AC is tangent to AR. This is normal profits. Why? Because their cost and revenues are the same here. The cost and revenues are the same here. C is equal to R at this point. Say if we, so remember this is how the graph looks like all the time for a firm in perfect competition. But the graph for a firm in imperfect competition looks different. Why does the graph look different? Because the revenue curves are different. Do we know the revenue curves to look like this top part here, right? For imperfect competition, firms have no homogeneous goods, no perfect information. There's maybe barriers to entry and exit and not many sellers. This is how the graph looks for their revenue curves. Whereas for perfect competition, what we just saw, where firms are all the same, they have homogeneous goods, many buyers and sellers, perfect information, no barriers to entry and exit. These kind of firms, like farmers and stuff, their curve just looks flat. And so when they profit maximize with a flat curve, um, we just saw that they make normal profits, which is basically zero profits, where AC is equal to AR, and that's what we just linked to here. If we want to see a firm now with an imperfect competition firm, we have to change the graph slightly, okay? First thing we want to change is we know that the average revenue and the marginal revenue are not the same in this graph anymore. And we proved this using the tables. We proved this using the tables. We go back up. We saw this table and we saw that a firm in imperfect competition, they're not price takers anymore. These were price takers. Perfect competition were price takers. They charge one single price. That's why the price level was the same throughout the whole way. Whereas a firm in imperfect competition, a more powerful firm, so like a normal firm basically, they can change their prices. Yeah, you can see the prices are changing. So that means the demand for these goods are changing too, and that's why the revenue curves are different. AR is not equal to MR anymore. MR is twice as steep. And that's why I drew the graph like this. So MR is here, AR is here, and this is also equal to your demand curve. And your marginal cost always look like this. This is actually also equal to your supply curve, but also not necessary. Okay. So if I want to show now, this is the tricky part. So remember that price is here and quantity is here. Actually, in economics, we can also represent price, cost, and revenue. So P/C/R. So this firm is always going to profit maximize, okay? And depending on where you draw your average cost curve is going to show whether this firm makes normal profit, supernormal profit, or subnormal profit. So literally depending on that. So you need to be careful of where you put your average cost curve. If I want to show a firm making supernormal profits, which is positive level of profits, then I need to draw my average cost curve below my average revenue curve. You see this average revenue curve here? AR is equal to D. I need to draw my average cost curve somewhere below this, but the marginal cost still has to cut through the bottom of it. For example, like this. Okay. If I draw my average cost curve here, then this bottom part is below the average revenue curve. So now where does the firm produce on this graph? So these are all the lines we need now. It looks a bit complicated. But first we drew our MR and our AR, then we drew our MC, then we need to draw our AC. So basically two revenue curves and two cost curves. So where on this graph does the firm produce? If so, the firm in this graph is going to profit maximize, where MC is equal to MR. Okay. No, that's the condition for profit maximization. You have to know this. MC is equal to MR. And where does that point happen? It happens here, isn't it? Yeah. You see that? MC is equal to MR. Does everyone get that? Yeah. Because MC cuts through MR right there. So that is my quantity level for this firm. That's my quantity here. Now the next crucial part on this diagram is you need to show the actual profits. But how do you show the profits? To show profits, you need to show how much the firm is making in terms of revenue and how much the firm is making in terms of cost. So total revenue minus total cost. So if I go up the dotted line, I can see that I hit my AC curve first, isn't it? Because AC is below AR. So at this point here, I can call this my cost, call that C. If I go further up, at this point here, I hit my what? Average revenue curve, isn't it? That's my revenue, okay? You see this box here now? That is now called supernormal profits, okay? Super normal profit. Now I couldn't draw this box for this horizontal line here. Okay, there's no way I can draw an AC curve that would represent well I could, but for perfect competition, the AC curve is also always going to be tangent in the long run, like right here. And so you can't draw a box here. Costs are equal to revenue. See that later anyway. But yeah, so I'm just trying to get you guys used to like drawing the graphs and stuff. Okay. I should probably do the last. So do you want me to show a loss of profits? How that would look like? That'll probably help you. And let's do that. So we showed normal profits and we showed supernormal profits. Let's show. Let's do one other thing actually, because a lot of students get this wrong and get mixed up. So price slash cost slash revenue and quantity. I'm gonna draw my AR and MR curve first. It's always good to practice this in your free time, just the graph drawing, because you're gonna be doing that so much. So I drew my AR and my MR. And then I'm gonna draw my marginal cost next. And now if I want to show negative profits, okay, my costs have to be bigger than my revenue. Okay. So my average cost has to be like somewhere here. Okay. Because so can you see I'm adjusting the profits according to how much my costs are. So according to where I draw my average cost curve. So these other three curves, the average revenue, marginal revenue, the marginal cost, they were standard. They're always the same. But depending on where you draw your AC, that's going to determine what profits that you're going to show. So I drew my AC below AR before. That's why I could show supernormal profits. So now here, I'm drawing my AC above AR now. So this is going to show subnormal profits, which is negative profits, making a loss. I'll do this in blue. Again, the firm is still going to profit maximize at this point here. MC is equal to MR. But now we first hit our average revenue curve. Okay. So this is our revenue here. Then we go further up, then we hit our cost curve up here. So now I have negative profits here, subnormal profits. Okay. Maybe it's not so clear. It's here. Okay. Cost, revenue. All right. Okay, so that was subnormal profits. And now one other thing that we need to show is with a firm firm in imperfect competition, they can also make a normal profits. And we'll see this with monopolistic competition at some point. So let's do this quickly. So remember that this was where AR is bigger than AC. This is where AR is less than AC. And now I'm going to show where AR is equal to AC. So price slash cost slash revenue. Quantity, this is AR is equal to demand, and this is marginal revenue. And then this is marginal cost. Now, this is a tricky part here because you need to show a point where your average revenue, where AI is equal to D, AI is equal to D is equal to your average cost. Now, to show this, the curves have to be tangent. AC and AR have to be tangent to show normal profits. So again, let's go back to MC is equal to MR. MC is equal to MR at this point here. Okay, so let me move. So first, I want to see where I need to draw my curve. So if I go up, okay, I hit my revenue here. Okay, but remember, I'm not showing negative profits. I'm not showing positive profits. I need to show that the profits there's no profits basically. So I need to show that my revenue is equal to my cost. But how do I do that? I somehow need to have this point here be tangent with my AC curve that I'm going to draw. But I'm going to draw my AC curve now like this, tangent, and still it has the MC curve has to cut through the bottom part of it. Okay, so here the cost and revenues are the same. And I can't draw a box. I can't draw a box here because R and R is equal to C. So this is normal profits. Normal profits, which basically means zero profit. But it's enough to keep the business going. So it's very, very important that you note these graphs down because they're going to be your best friend when it comes to some of these essays. Let's look at applying some of these graphs now to market structures and understanding what market structures are. So market structures are characteristics of a market which determines firms' behavior. For example, the number of firms in the market, the number of firms which might enter the market, the barriers to entry, the extent to which goods in the market are similar, the knowledge in the market, and the extent to which actions of one firm will affect another firm. These are all characteristics of firms in market structures. Now, we've already discussed market structures. Okay, we've already discussed perfect competition and their characteristics, the number of firms, they're homogeneous, they have many firms and stuff like that. And imperfect competition as well is the opposite. Now we're going to delve into this deeper. Okay. So what we're going to understand is that we're going to look at 4 main market structures or types of firms in the industry. So we already saw perfect competition. I'm just going to call it PC. Okay, so I'm going to draw this, I'm going to use this like a spectrum. Okay, so we have perfect competition. Then above this, we have something called monopolistic competition. Okay, and then after this, we have something called a oligopoly. You know what? Let me draw it. Let me do it the other way. I'm just going to do it as a text actually. So we have number 1, perfect competition. And then we have number 2, have monopolistic competition. Monopolistic. Then after this, we have something called a oligopoly. After this, we have something called a monopoly. Right? There's also other different types of market structures. Won't go into that too much now. Okay, so this is kind of like the spectrum of things. Okay, so we already seen what perfect competition is. Okay, this is just perfect competition, but the rest here, this is imperfect competition. Okay, imperfect. Okay, so some of the characteristics that we talked about in imperfect competition are related to these three other market structures. So we basically already know a lot about perfect competition. Actually, we don't really know that much, but yeah, we know the basics of them. You probably have no clue what monopolistic, oligopoly, and monopoly is yet. But these are just market structures where there's different kinds of firms in these market structures. Okay, so we know that the types of firms in perfect competition, they don't really exist because these are perfect firms that are all the same and things, but we have like a near perfect competition, such as like farmers selling stuff, selling the same goods and things. But when we move up the spectrum, we get more powerful and more powerful firms who start to set their own prices, who sell different types of goods, who have different buyers and sellers, whose graphs are looking different. And so we're moving up the spectrum. It's almost as if these firms are getting more and more powerful and more scarce. Okay? And we're moving away from perfect competition. Perfect competition is for economics is the ideal types of firms that we want to have in the economy. Okay. But when we move more and more away from it, we're actually like distorting the market almost. So let's understand these a bit more. So what's a firm that's a monopoly is a firm where there's only one supplier in the market. This is only one firm in the market that supplies one type of good. This is also the opposite end of the spectrum of a perfect competition. These don't really exist in real life, but we can have near monopoly firms such as like Apple, Samsung, and stuff, where they're the only supplier of that type of product. An oligopoly, what's a firm in an oligopoly? So these are where we have not one firm now. This is when we have a few large producers that dominate the firm. For example, the airline industry. What about in perfect competition? So these are large number of small suppliers, none of which are big enough to dominate the market. For example, the potato market in perfect competition. It also says slash monopolistic competition, but don't worry about that. We'll look at that later. So what we're basically doing here is we're looking at we're looking at these market structures, each of these market structures, perfect, monopolistic, oligopoly, monopoly, and we're looking at the characteristics of them. Okay, so in perfect, there's many buyers and sellers. Monopolistic competition, there's many buyers and sellers. Oligopoly, there's still many buyers and sellers, but fewer than the first two. And monopoly, there's only one seller. Okay. Barriers of entry. So this is another characteristics of these firms. So is it easy to get into these kind of markets? If I wanted to set up a potato farm, is it easy for me to get into perfect competition? If I wanted to compete with a firm like Apple, who's a monopoly, is it easy for me to get into that market? Are there barriers to entry into that market? So what are some of these barriers? You have to think about legal barriers like patents, licenses. Yeah. Am I going to compete with Apple and copy their products? They have patents and licenses of them, isn't it? That's a barrier to entry. That's going to stop me from doing that. And because they're a very, very powerful firm. Whereas if I wanted to compete against a farm or something, they probably don't have a patent on potatoes. So I could easily compete against them. So my barriers to entry to that in that aspect are lower than if I wanted to compete against a monopoly. Capital cost. If you want to buy a corner shop, it would be much cheaper than buying a car plant, as only large firms could afford it. So entry and capital cost can be a barrier to entry, definitely. Yeah. So my actual startup cost to like competing against firms, you have to think about that. Imagine how much it would cost me to compete against an airline or something like that, which is an oligopoly. Sunk costs, so which are not recoverable. For example, from advertising or the loss from selling assets. High sunk costs can act as a barrier to entry, but low sunk costs can encourage firms to enter. So sunk costs are costs that you cannot get back. Scale economies. So this is where we talk about economies of scale. We did that last week. So where a firm is operating at its lowest cost and producing optimum amount which satisfies all demand of buyers. So think about the minimum efficient scale. So this deters new entry of firms as they will produce less at higher costs. There's no point these firms coming in if there's already a firm that's producing at the lowest cost because they wouldn't be able to compete with them. Natural cost advantages. So when firms own factors which are superior to others and are unique, for example, a petrol site on a busy road is likely to be superior than one in a sleepy country road, but they will have high revenues. Marketing barriers. Firms may be able to erect very high barriers through high spending on advertising and marketing. This makes consumers associate particular goods with the firm, creating a strong brand image and making it hard for new entries in the market. Okay, so if a firm is marketing their good very, very well, it's going to be hard for a new firm to compete with them because people associate certain products with certain brands. For example, when you think about tracksuits, you might think about Nike, and so it's hard to compete with them. Limit pricing. So this is more about oligopolies. Firms may choose to set lower prices than they would charge if they maximize their short-term profits. If they only earn normal profits, new firms will not be attracted in the industry. So okay, don't worry about this too much. But this is basically a strategy that oligopolies use to deter entry. So they lower their price to a normal profit level amount so that other firms don't come into the market and try to take their profits. So other characteristics are things like product homogeneity, which we saw was how identical these goods are. So if it's homogeneous, then the goods are identical, and we saw that that's only with perfect competition. But as we move along 2, 3, and 4, because they're in imperfect competition, they become non-homogeneous. And also these firms become price makers. They set their prices of their goods, whereas in perfect competition, they're price takers. They can't set their prices. They can only charge a one price. We saw last week why that was, because if they increase their price, no firms would follow, they would lose out on revenue. And if they decrease their price, all the firms would follow and they would just still lose revenue. So it only makes sense for them to just keep the same price. And that's why the revenue curve for this perfect competition was horizontal. And the rest of these, it was diagonal, it was going down. And we had two different curves for this and one curve for this, for the cost curves. Knowledge. So buyers and sellers are said to have perfect knowledge or information about prices, output, and products. So firms can't put prices up as it would lose all its customers and they would go to all their competitors. Perfect knowledge means all firms in the market have access to the same information, but up to them if they want to use it. There's asymmetric information in the market where there's imperfect knowledge and some firms have more information than others, so they will make better decisions to put them in a competitive advantage. So we looked at asymmetric information last year when we looked at market structure. So asymmetric information is when one party has more information than the other. So there's imperfect knowledge. So some firms have more information than others. So the firms with more information will make better decisions and there will be a more competitive advantage because they probably have higher profits. Interrelationships with markets. So this is just to do with oligopolies. So we'll see when we look at oligopolies, it's kind of a very, very strange kind of market structure compared to the rest. It's not very conventional. And basically these firms are more have heavy competition because there's a few of them, they have heavy competition with each other. So they always do things. So if one firm does something, it vastly affects the reactions of another firm and what they do. They're always in like kind of a war. See that later. We'll see about that later. But they have interdependence basically. When the actions of one firm will have an impact on other firms, whereas the rest that we saw are independent. Firms may be independent of each other, which means the actions of one firm will have no significant impact on any other firm. Yep. So these are basically what we're looking at. Okay. Last thing is the barriers to exit. So we saw the barriers to entry here. These are the different barriers to entry. So what stops someone coming into the market? But what stops someone, if they're in the market already, what stops them from leaving the market? By the way, firms that are already in a market are called incumbent firms. If you ever hear that word, incumbent firms, that means they're already in the market. So barriers to exit. What might stop a firm from leaving the market? Say if a firm is already in a monopoly or oligopoly or in perfect competition, what might stop them from leaving? Well, we already know that firm in perfect competition, there's nothing stopping them from leaving because they don't really have much sunk costs or anything like that. So they'll be all right. But the rest of these firms will probably have quite a bit of sunk costs and things. So if you look at the resale of assets, if a firm has a lot of assets and wants to leave, but the prices of their assets are low now, it will put them off to leave because when they resell, they won't really get much money. Redundancy costs. So when leaving the industry, you need to pay redundancy for all your staff, which is costly, deterring firms exiting the market. Cost of ending a license agreement. So when firms set up, they will often have a license agreement, say for so if they rent like contracts which last a certain period of time, and if you end those contracts early, then you might need to pay a cost for doing so. So that might even deter them. Let's go on to something very important now. Something called objectives of firms. Okay, so you might think that any firm that sets up, their objective is always going to be profit maximize. It makes sense, right? Profit maximization, where MC is equal to MR. We saw this. So a firm would always want to, have like supernormal profits. If you look at the graph on the left here at the bottom, this is the ideal position of a firm in imperfect competition, where MC is equal to MR. They don't really want to be in the normal profit area, and they definitely don't want to be in the subnormal profit area because they're making a loss. So why is it that some firms want this and other firms might even want this normal profit? Some firms even be okay with subnormal profits. Why do different firms have different objectives? So if you look at a profit maximizing firm, or these firms, they do this to keep shareholders happy. They do this because they can reinvest their profits into the business rather than taking out loans, and they will have greater efficiency. So yeah, supernormal profits making everyone happy, and they're probably growing as a firm as well. But why might a firm not want to profit maximize? So the firm may not know its marginal revenue or working out its marginal costs. So you see how we drew this graph here. How can a firm easily represent their whole firm onto a graph like this? It may be hard for them. They may not know their marginal cost and marginal revenues for them to know what profit maximization is for them. They don't know what to produce. If a firm is making huge profits, there's greater risk of competition authorities investigating the firm. For example, the government bodies might suspect exploitation of consumers, such as higher prices, which may cost the firm. So in this case, a firm will avoid making really, really high profits because government bodies might investigate them and be like, why are they making so many profits? What are they doing to do this? And so they might want to, not go through all of that and just make a certain number of profit. And firms may pursue other objectives, which we're going to look at. So let's look at another objective that firms might want. It's called profit satisficing. So this is when there is a divorce of ownership and control, meaning a divorce between who owns the company and who runs the company. For many large firms, this occurs where shareholders, which are the owners of the firm, will want to profit maximize. Okay, so shareholders, if I have a share in a company, then I want to make as much money as possible from that company, isn't it? That's all I care about. I want to make money because I'm a part owner of this company. I don't run it, but I own part of it. And so I want to get my money back. And so this might be this objective might be different to who actually runs the company. Who runs the company is the managers and things. So the managers might want to actually just grow the company and make it bigger. They might have other objectives, whereas the owners don't want to do that. They just want to get as much money as possible. And so there's a divorce of ownership and control here. Also, there's other shareholders at stake here. For example, workers and stuff. They want better working conditions. Um, yeah, so these stakeholders, the consumers, workers, managers, and owners, and the government, they all kind of clash with each other because they're trying to get something different out of this one firm. So what happens is that to make everyone happy, they all decide to make a certain level of profit called profit satisficing. Okay. That satisfies everyone. So it's not a profit maximizing amount, might be lower than that, and it might be somewhere that just basically makes everyone happy. Another objective is actually just surviving in the market. So this is making enough profit or do enough for the firm to just survive. So for example, many firms in the transport sector, if you think about TfL, we know that they have very, very high fixed costs to start up and maybe huge competition in the industry. In which case survival is good enough for the firm. So this may be a short-term objective. Other examples are basically things that we call natural monopolies, which are looking at things like gas companies. If you think about like British Gas or like water companies like Thames Water, they will always have to produce because they're natural monopolies, they're necessities. And so they will do enough, they will make enough profit, just enough to survive. Revenue maximization is another objective that we faintly saw last week. Go back up, this one here, revenue maximization. We saw that the condition was where marginal revenue is equal to 0. Okay. So revenue maximization, this is where MI is equal to 0. So firms may want to revenue maximize rather than profit maximize to drive out their competition through predatory pricing. This means the price change by firms will drop and the quantity produced will go up, so more consumers will go to this firm, so competitors will then suffer. So revenue maximization was all about making as much money as possible. They can drive out the competition through predatory pricing. Also, as revenues increase and the firm's growing size, it may have economies of scale. Okay. So how do I represent MR equal to 0 on a graph like this? Okay, so just make sure you look back at the video and get these graphs noted down. It's very important that you know them. I'll just take out this for now. How do I show revenue maximization on a imperfect competition graph? This is where average revenue is equal to demand. And this is where marginal revenue, marginal cost. I'm gonna draw out these graphs so many times because this is like gonna be the basis of most of your essays. If you get this graph wrong, the entire essay is just like not great. Okay, so what graph am I missing here? My average cost curve. Okay, so my average cost curve here doesn't really matter too much. I'm just gonna let's see. Where did I draw it before? Somewhere there. Okay. So average cost. Oh my God, that's terrible. Average cost somewhere here. So we want to see where marginal revenue is equal to 0. Yeah, MI is equal to 0. So where does MI equal to 0? So in order to show this, your MR has to be touching 0. Okay. So I need to actually extend this further. Okay. Remember I said MR could go negative? You can draw MR all the way down below the x-axis. So at this point here, This is where your marginal revenue is equal to 0. Okay, so at this point here, if I go up, this is where I hit my AR curve. So this is my revenue, which is also my price level. Okay, remember that this is also to price. So anywhere I put revenue on these other graphs, this is actually the price level. Okay, average revenue is equal to the price. And this was also my cost. So I'm actually making supernormal profits here because of my AC curve, but I'm producing more than if I was to profit maximize, which would be at MC equal to MR. MC equal to MR would be at this point here at this quantity. But I'm producing at this quantity where MR is equal to 0. So this is revenue maximizing, revenue max. This is getting as much revenue as possible. Okay, that's the objective, not profit maximizing. Sales maximization. So this is the last objective we're going to see. So this is where AC is equal to AR, which is the break-even level output. Now this AC equal to AR is different from this AC equal to AR with normal profit. Remember, with normal profit, we had to show the AC tangent to the AR curve to show that revenue is equal to cost equal to price. But for in sales maximization, this condition does not hold. Okay, this tangency does not hold for sales maximization. So if I want to show sales maximization on this graph, okay, where AC is equal to AR, this is sales max. Then where does AC equal to AR here? At this point here, right? This is where they're crossing each other, they're not tangent. So at this point here, I'm producing here, and that makes sense because I'm sales maximizing. I'm producing as many quantity of goods as possible, more than the profit maximizing, more than the revenue maximizing amount. All right. Okay, cool. Yeah. So there were the different objectives of firms. So how many did we look at? We basically looked at 5, including survival. And this graph is just showing where some of these were. So profit max, Q rev, Q sales. Okay, so efficiencies now. Yep. Let's do this last thing today, because I'm sure this is a lot to take in. So one way we can describe these graphs are so we can look at how efficient these graphs are basically. And these graphs are linked to market structures as well. We're going to see which market structures have these graphs. So, a monopoly might have this graph here, a supernormal profit. A monopolistic competition will have this graph here, a normal profit. None of these graphs will be perfect competition because the perfect competition cost line is horizontal. I haven't showed that in any of these, but we looked at that earlier. These are all imperfect competition graphs. And you know that because the revenue curves are diagonal, they're going downwards. So efficiencies, so let's look at different types of efficiencies. So we have something called allocative efficiency. So this is where demand is equal to supply. So so this is where D is equal to S, or the most commonly used one is where P is equal to MC. So this is where resources are allocated at a point where consumer satisfaction is maximized and demand demanding a product. So the price is equal to marginal cost. If I want to show P equal to MC on a graph, okay, I can show this on a perfect competition graph, okay. I can't, so I can show P is equal to MC in all these graphs as well, but none of these graphs are currently allocatively efficient. None of these imperfect competition graphs are allocatively efficient. Why? Because P is not equal to MC in any of these graphs. I could show where P is equal to MC. So the best way to basically show it, I'll give you a little tip here. A lot of people know that average revenue is equal to demand, but not many people realize that if we have a demand on a graph, we also have to have a supply somewhere. So the supply it was mathematically proven that the supply is equal to the marginal cost. So anytime I put marginal cost here, these are also equal to the supply curve. And so wherever I see where demand is equal to supply, that is where I have allocative efficiency, where everyone is satisfied. So this point here is where I have allocative efficiency. And this point here is where P is also equal to MC. So you can show this here. It also make normal profits here. But yeah, that is where you have allocative efficiency if you wanted to show it on a graph where demand is equal to supply. But we'll look at that a bit later when we analyze the graphs further. Productive efficiency. So when firms maximize production and minimize their costs, exploiting all economies of scale, and this occurs at the minimum point on the AC curve. So if a firm is producing at the minimum point on the AC curve, it has productive efficiency. None of these curves here are productively efficient because they're not producing on the minimum point on the AC curve. The only time we'll get a firm that is productively efficient is probably a perfect competition firm. So let's draw the perfect competition firm again. Remember, their revenue curve look different. Revenue curve is just a straight line because they can only charge one price. This is the price. My average revenue is equal to marginal revenue is equal to demand. My marginal cost, which is equal to supply. And I have my average cost, which is here. Okay. Price slash cost slash revenue. This is your quantity. And this firm is going to produce where MC is equal to MR. Okay. The quantity here. Now at this point here, we have MC is equal to MR. We make normal profits where AC is equal to AR. But we also have where P is equal to MC, or demand is equal to supply. And we're also producing at the minimum point on the AC curve, which means it is productively efficient. So it's allocatively efficient and productively efficient. Okay. Then that's only with the perfect competition graph. So this is the graph that looks like for farmers and stuff. What's dynamic efficiency? So this occurs over time where supernormal profits need to be made. So in the future, those profits can be reinvested in innovation. This means in the long run, costs would be lowered. So dynamic efficiency is basically anytime you see a firm making supernormal profits, they're basically considered as dynamically efficient because they can reinvest those supernormal profits, those positive profits, in the long run so they can lower their costs. And we can see this here with this supernormal profit diagram, which you'll probably see with monopolies such as like Apple, Samsung, and other like big sellers who are making high levels of profits. They go through dynamic efficiency, but there's no dynamic efficiency on a farmer because they're making normal profits. They don't have positive profits to reinvest in the business. So they're not dynamically efficient. What's X efficiency? So this means there is no waste and occurs at any point on the AC curve. So if you're producing at any point on the AC curve, that means you're not being wasteful, basically. So if we look at, for example, the monopolistic diagram, we are producing on the AC curve because we touch it here. On the perfect competition diagram, we are producing on the AC curve because we touch it at the red point. For like a monopoly diagram, here we're making signal profits. We're not X efficient because where we're producing the AR curve over here. We're not producing on the AC curve. And same goes for a firm that's making negative profits if they're in a loss. Okay, so so we can look at these different types of efficiencies further. So allocative efficiency. So for a consumer, it means that resources are following consumer demand and getting exactly what they want and the amount they want. They get at low prices, so there is maximization of consumer surplus. They are getting high choice of quantity in the market as well as high quality. For a producer, it's a way to retain or increase their market share to stay ahead of competition who aren't doing what they do perfectly. It also means they can increase their profits by bringing consumers to them as well as so bringing consumers to them as well because consumers are also benefiting. So what we're basically doing here is we're looking at a diagram and we're basically describing it in terms of efficiencies. Because what's going to happen in your essay is that if you need to talk about any of these market structures, so for example, if you need to talk about perfect competition, you're going to draw this diagram and then you're going to need to analyze it. But how do you analyze this diagram? One very good tip is analyzing it through the different types of efficiencies that they hold. So we can see that perfect competition diagram holds that it's allocatively efficient, productively efficient. They're not dynamically efficient because they don't make profits, but they are also X efficient, okay? So that's 4 things that you could describe about just this perfect competition diagram in terms of their efficiencies. And so this is the type of stuff that you would say about it. So people are getting what they want and how much they want. Productively efficient. So for consumers, if low average cost is passed on to them, then they may get lower prices, which is good as it means high consumer surplus. This all comes because of the full exploitation of full economies of scale and firms operating on the minimum point of their average cost. Okay. Remember, we looked at economies of scale and looked at the MES. So this is what we're basically talking about. Okay, the productive efficient. So yeah, you can read onto this further. Dynamic efficiency, we basically explained it already. X efficiency, we know that as well. So it's just any point on the AC curve that's minimizing costs, reducing waste. We have one last type of efficiency that we only get from perfect competition is when we can achieve allocative, productive, and X efficient. These are called static efficient. This is when you have static efficiency, which takes place at one given point. You can see one given point here on the red point here. We've achieved allocative, productive, and X efficiency from one given point. This is what we call static efficiency. So it's just like another term, to like, you know, if you want like a better grade, then you have to use this kind of vocabulary to impress the examiner. So not many people would know that. Okay, cool. So next week we're gonna go on to technological innovation. So what we did was profit, market structure, objectives of firms, and efficiency. We need to do technological innovation. Actually, we didn't do this, did we? We didn't. So we did objective of firms, but we still need to do why firms grow and demergers and stuff. So we will do that next week. Then we go over to technological changes. And then we're going to look at perfect competition, monopolies and natural monopolies, monopolistic competition, oligopolies, much more further, so that we get a better understanding from it. Because I know like so far I've just been showing you bits and bobs, but I need to show you these kind of stuff so you get like a brief understanding of what we're going towards. I'm hoping these graphs become a bit more familiar to you if you see it in your school. But yeah, they are a bit tricky. It's very important that you practice them. Practice them even now. Just get a notebook out and try drawing them and try to replicate them. You can post it in the group chat and ask if it's right or not. Don't be shy. If you have any questions from your school that you need answering, you don't even need to PM me. You can just put it in the group chat. We can talk about it because it will help everyone. But yeah, how are you guys finding it so far?
Could be better, to be honest. My teacher's not really good.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm here for, innit? Trying to, because Jeffrey your teacher would never teach you this in one lesson, would he? Like he hasn't got a clue what he's doing.
Nah, cheap, man.
Yeah, what about you, Tajwa? How are you finding it?
It's all right. It's just like a lot to try like
Yeah.
get my head around.
Yeah, it's a lot. That's why you have to look back at these videos. You have to look back at it every single week. It's only a 1 hour of your time. If you have a free period, literally just whip out your phone and watch the video because you don't understand how much it's going to help you to memorize this stuff now. Trust me, I know, man. When I did economics, I made these notes and they didn't all stick in my head straight away. And when I went to revise it like a month before, I was struggling to get everything into my head. I still managed to do it, but if I started memorizing from the start, I would have been so much better position. Because what happens is that you start memorizing content and you don't give you don't give yourself enough time to actually go through the exam questions, which is also very important, and the exam technique, which I'll teach you anyway. What about you, Ijaz? How are you finding it?
Like I understand parts in that, but
Yeah,
when I go to say like remember stuff or like say I go to put things together, sometimes I just get a bit lost
yeah, no, I
because it's a
understand that.
lot of information.
Yeah, I understand that completely. That's why, like, we're getting through content now, but when we look at actual exam questions, I'm literally gonna be like planning it out for you and writing it out for you and showing you like what a good essay answer looks like. So that confusion will go, and I'll show you how to come up with things to write in the actual exam, so you don't, have a blank head.
Yeah, that's calm.
I did that with Tajwa and he received a good grade because before it's like he found it hard to like come up with things to write about. Even
Yeah.
Tahmid as well, my cousin. But
Yeah,
yeah,
because in the exam, like especially like the 20 marker, 15 marker, and 25 markers, like
yeah,
I'll read the information, but like say when it comes to the explanation, I just don't know how to say things or like
mm.
that I don't have an application point or stuff like that.
Yeah, no, I understand. That's the difference between like a B grade student and an A-star student. But really, it's just a mindset that I'm going to teach you of like how to approach a question, and it's just
Yeah.
about applying what you already know into an actual essay.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll leave it there for now. I'll see you guys next week, all right?
Calm, calm.
Calm.
Excellent. I'm gonna upload this and put it in the chat.
Cool.